As the veil grows thin, our time grows short. Just a few days left to pre-order your copy of Achewillow Book 1. On Halloween, the 5th anniversary of Achewillow, the campaign will close, and with it, your opportunity to help us make this book, and all the perks that go along with it, a reality. Visit achewillow.com/book for all the information and to pre-order your copy today. And, as always, thank you for all your support. Achewillow. Special episode: A Spirit of Spirits. I had always thought of jealousy as having one of two flavors. Based on my own experiences, I assumed it was either a salty thing, born of envy and inspiring nothing but anger and resentment, or, from observing others, it had more of a saccharine taste, dripping of sadness and self-loathing. Having always been aware, but never a fan, of envy, I would have preferred that second kind of jealousy. From my point of view, it seemed like the path to self-improvement, and I wanted that for myself. With a few years' hindsight, the irony seems a lot more obvious now. The ordeal had been coming for some time. Like a toothache, it had sprung up one day, mild and indolent. There was no immediate cause for concern, but as time wore on, so did the enamel, exposing more and more of the nerve. Eventually, the offending chunk of bone demanded to be looked at, the pain becoming near unbearable. The roots felt weak, and their hold onto the jaw was loosening. Even the gums seemed to recede. So a dentist found, and an appointment is written into the calendar. Something has to be done once and for all. Maybe it won't be that bad. Perhaps it's a cavity that's been blown out of proportion. But it could also be the tooth is rotten to the core. Nothing short of extraction, or, mother forbid, a root canal, is necessary. Regardless, I'd been looking on this day as one might this imaginary dentist appointment. With dread, annoyance, fear, but maybe a little bit of hope, too. Ta-da! Annabelle burst out from the forest ahead of me like a game show contestant walking onto a stage. I remember the faded red of her hair looked pink on that overcast day. She spread her arms to the side and twirled, pebbles cracking and crunching under her feet. We'd spent almost half an hour walking a beaten path through the pine forests of North Achewillow, cutting through unrelenting humidity and tolerating some of the worst bugs Quebec has to offer. From the mosquitoes that threaten to enter your ears with a loud buzzing, to the mosquitoes that land on your naked leg to take a generous sip of blood. All the while, I'd been carrying a solid 40 extra pounds of food, drinks, towels, and cooking equipment that were meant to turn this terrible idea of a day into a worthwhile adventure. I stepped out from under the shadow of evergreens and into the timid glow of distant clouds. Oppressive humidity was suddenly reinforced by the heat of the sun, as diffuse as it was by the covered sky. There it was, my proverbial dentist appointment. The place maps insisted was named Dalton Lake, though everyone either called it Leech Lake or Leech Beach, depending on whether they preferred alliteration or rhymes.
What do you think?
Annabelle beamed.
Like our own private chunk of the Bahamas.
Post-apocalyptic Bahamas, maybe. There wasn't a lot to be impressed with. The sand, if any, was hidden under a thick layer of smooth, dime-sized pebbles. I could feel them digging through the soles of my sneakers and threatening agony to whoever would go barefoot in this place. Beyond the beach itself was the water, dark and forbidding. Even from a distance, I could tell it was cold and murky, its bottom the texture of wet icing. Patches of vegetation the color of lentil soup floated at the surface near shore. Then there was the smell. Whatever lived in those waters was either dying or wishing for death. The tall evergreens that walled off the lake kept wind to a minimum, trapping humidity and stench alike.
Come on,
my friend said, trying to encourage me while struggling to strip to her bathing suit.
we only get a few days to enjoy this place. Next week, the water will have receded too much and the algae will choke the surface. And last week, there were still way too many leeches. This is all we get. Theater of the mind, Miriam. Imagine that it's a gorgeous white sand beach.
Peter Pan's lost boys wouldn't have enough imagination between the lot of them to think of Leech Lake as a tropical getaway. During previous years, I'd managed to dodge joining my friends on their annual excursion here, leaning on my work at the cafe or visits to Montreal to avoid this social obligation. That year, though, Annabelle cornered me, making sure my calendar was clear before springing her invitation. On the bright side, that was back in the day when I still thought misery was a dish best shared. You really take me to the best places, don't you? Looking over my shoulder, I watched Ophelia emerge from the dirt path. At first, I thought she was complaining at Gulliver, who was following behind, but I was quickly reminded that she reserved that level of acidity only for me. To be fair, it had been my idea that she join us. We laugh about it now, but I did it entirely and completely out of spite. Well, I laugh about it now. I set up as best I could. The rocky, uneven ground made it difficult to use my camping stove. There was nowhere to put down a towel and lie down comfortably. My plans to relax and get some reading done weren't looking good. The idea of taking a swim in the waters of Leech Lake didn't appeal. Thankfully, there was plenty of people watching to do. Seemed like almost everyone from Achewillow wanted to take advantage of the narrow window of opportunity and enjoy the beach. The smart and experienced ones had brought folding chairs and inflatable mattresses. Hauling those through the woods must have been a hassle, but one well worth it when compared to lying on a bed of rocks. Kids were the only ones who seemed to have any enthusiasm for the adventure. No sooner would they arrive on site than they'd toss off their t-shirts and run towards the water, kicking off sandals and flip-flops once they'd reached the edge.
I'm surprised your swimsuit isn't knitted.
I took a jab at Ophelia as she disrobed to test the water. In fact, she was wearing the blandest one-piece black suit imaginable. There was still a tag attached, testifying to it being a last-minute purchase.
Hilarious,
she replied, pulling off the tag.
But you'll be happy to know I brought everyone some towels I made.
Tiptoeing through the pebbles, she made her way to one of her bags. Proud and smug, she brought out a half-dozen thin towels, picking out a forest green one to toss in my direction.
You're kidding.
When choosing a towel, there isn't a long list of materials I'd go for. Terry cloth, cotton, maybe linen, but not this.
Hand knit,
she bragged, as if that was a feature one would look for in a beach towel. I dropped the damn thing to the ground next to me and focused on my cooking. After all, if we're going to suffer a subpar day at a terrible beach, we might as well have some life-changing burgers. Shooing away flies and heating up my brand-new camp stove, I watched with curiosity the modest crowd braving the pebbles in the dark waters. I felt like we were role-playing a proper vacation, pretending at having fun. The line separating locals from visitors was evident at a glance. Annabelle, like the children and a handful of adults, was quick to the water, running in with abandon. Not a moment of hesitation, no time to look for any stray leeches, just the pure disrespect for the unknown. The lake could have swallowed the lot of them whole, and they would have gone down with a grin on their faces. "Not gonna jump in?" Eric asked, struggling to keep his balance while removing his shoes. "Nah, I'm waiting for Annabelle's exsanguinated remains to wash up first." My humor was lost on my brother, and he opted to pal around with Gulliver instead. While having somewhat made my peace with Ophelia, it still stung to see the two of them together. and despite months separating me from the event, I still could not fully shake the image of my friend breaking his hand on the Achewillow's counter. Watching them, though, it was hard to deny that they looked comfortable as a pair. I don't think anyone would accuse them of excessive passion, but they seemed to each have a calming effect on the other. Knowing what I know now, I'm glad I had the grace to allow them these moments. "Gonna hit the water?" Eric asked, giving Gulliver a friendly punch to the shoulder. The sizzling of ground meat swallowed the rest of their conversation, but I was satisfied seeing Eric try to make friends. Achewillow, while a suitable refuge for him, had been somewhat of a culture shock. The little rural village couldn't compete in options with the urban vitality of Montreal. Our one lonely tavern had nothing on the hundreds of bars, clubs, pubs, and discos in the big city. Gulliver was all smiles that day. I remember him laughing with the nonchalance that had put me at ease when we first met. His throat bare and white teeth exposed to the sky, he always had an honesty to his good humor. The only thing that didn't sit right with me was how he never took off his pants. Everyone else was at least pretending they were going to face the cold depths of Leech Lake, but Gulliver kept his black jeans and sneakers.
"That water is colder than a witch's teeth,"
Annabelle said, making her sheepish way back to our corner of the beach.
"No offense."
Without asking, she picked up the green towel next to my bag, and without thinking, wrapped it around her shivering shoulders. I expected her to throw it away, irritated at the texture and how sodden the wool would be. It'd be like trying to wipe down a counter with a shawl, inefficient and useless. Instead, Annabelle appeared to melt like a slice of camembert atop a warm crostini. Her spine curled like a shrimp in hot butter, while her features softened, ice cream under a summer sun. And with barely any wiping or dabbing of the cloth, she was dry. Even her hair. A quick glance at Ophelia wearing a satisfied grin confirmed my suspicions.
"You're welcome,"
she said, unpacking more of her towels to distribute to everyone around. Ophelia had her own brand of magic, and back then she was a far better witch than I. It's difficult to admit now, and it was impossible to accept then. So I did what I did best. I clenched my teeth and tried to one-up her. As luck would have it, I'd brought my own little surprise. Oh, I remember spending quite a while digging through the family cookbook, looking for something fun and flashy that I could cook up on the go. I flipped the burgers, adding some buns to toast and slices of thin brie for flavor. The magic was already there, though, ground into the meat with spices and chopped onions. I'd shaped every patty myself, whispering the incantations just as written in Melody's recipe. Sure, the original was meant for meat pies, but I knew where the enchantment was centered and felt confident that I could adapt it to burgers without risk. It worked like a charm, too. The first and most important magic was the flavor. The inclusion of strips of smoked Atlantic salmon to the meat gave it a bit of a kick, emphasized by the fresh cracked pepper and a touch of balsamic vinegar. Even Ophelia, who of course had brought her own lunch despite my instructions, was forced to admit just how good the burgers were. The second, more mystical part of the spell, however, was a surprise. "Aren't we supposed to wait before we go swimming?" Eric asked, referring to the old belief that kids shouldn't swim immediately after eating. There was no reason to bother with an answer. What was the threat of a cramp when compared to icy waters and voracious leeches? I've long ago learned the value of leading by example, and on that day, I did just that. Not only to show my big brother that the waters were safe, even on a full stomach, but also to show off just what I had done. Taking a deep breath, I plunged into the dark lake. It was like diving through pure night. The glistening surface separating me from the blood-sucking monsters broke with little effort, and the cold stole the breath from my lungs. The good news was that I didn't need it. Once over the shock, transitioning from warm sun to the icy water, I was able to look around and, for the first time, taste the sights of Leech Lake. I remember feeling something akin to awe. While there was plenty of silt and debris kicked up by my plunge and previous bathers, there remained a quiet beauty to this side of the surface. Strands of kelp reached from the murky depths as if trying to escape some cruel fate. Beams of light danced around in a near magical ballet dictated by the waves. There was no leech in sight, and not a fish to be seen. Allowing myself to sink to the bottom, I sat in the sandy clay and looked up. Sounds were amplified yet muffled. Everything that happened under the glassy surface roared into my ears, from splashing children to the paddling of inflatable rafts. Meanwhile, the laughter and cries of the surface world were distorted and weak, struggling to reach me in this underwater realm. Seconds ticked away, stretching themselves into a minute, and soon 2. Splashes, urgent and panic, cracked the surface, and soon 2 large bodies were diving to the bottom of Leech Lake, expecting to find a drowning Miriam. To Eric and Gulliver's surprise, they discovered me with a smile on my face. Once I knew they'd seen me, I swam away, never going up for air. The spell worked like a charm. Soon, Annabelle and even Ophelia joined in. The spell wasn't so powerful that we didn't need to come to the surface once in a while, and those more athletic, like Eric and Gulliver, could remain under for 5 or 6 minutes. It was tempting to explore farther from the beach, to swim to the middle of the lake and to see its true depth, but no amount of breath made that journey less forbidding. It's difficult to say who won our petty magical duel that day, Ophelia or me, but once our frolicking done, I shamelessly used her gifted towel to dry myself. My feet hurting from walking on the pebbles, my muscles aching from more exercise than I'd done in months, I was ready to call this terrible day an unlikely success. And that's when I noticed Annabelle. Walking back to town was an unexpected, ebullient event. The boys were talking about their adventures under Leech Lake, attempting to show each other up with friendly brags about the speed or depth at which they swam. Meanwhile, Ophelia wore a smile of rare serenity. I'd seen this woman vengeful, angry, petty, and vitriolic. The only time I'd witnessed joy in her eyes was when licking the plate from a hearty serving of my failures. Through everything, I don't think I'd ever seen her comfortable and content. I would have loved to indulge with them and share the moment. It would be some time before we all had a reason to laugh together like this again, but I couldn't, not with one of us left apart.
"It's nothing,"
Annabelle preempted as I saddled up beside her. The same girl who'd insisted we go to the awfully named Leech Lake and practically danced over sharp rocks to take the first dip spoke in a flat voice, devoid of enthusiasm or joy. "Oh, well, if you say so. Let me just take my concern and worry elsewhere then. Come on, spit it out."
"It's stupid,"
she confessed, lowering her voice and hastening her steps so the others wouldn't hear. It wouldn't be unusual for Annabelle to have organized this whole afternoon in an attempt to escape some personal issue, only to have it hound her again once done.
"Maybe it is,"
I said,
"but who am I to judge? You've seen my track record. So what is it? A guy? Your mom? Eric being a jerk? Because I can help with that last one."
She paused, allowing us to cross St. Andrew and make it to the sidewalk. The late afternoon had invited thick clouds to crowd the sky, leaving but a thin band of pink and orange on the horizon. Looked like we were walking underneath a fresh trout fillet.
"It's you,"
Annabelle answered after a moment.
"You and Ophelia."
Sensing more distress than I had first sniffed out, I took my friend's arm in mine and leaned in to try to look in her eyes.
"If you think I'm getting too chummy with her, don't worry. The enemy of my enemy isn't my friend quite yet. Probably ever. But I try to play nice for Gulliver's sake." "That's not it,"
she frowned.
"I thought we were going to go to the lake, have a laugh at how terrible it is, eat a little, drink a little, then come home. But you two had to magic it all up. And there's nothing wrong with that, except I can't be a part of it.
A younger version of me would have laughed. What a silly thing to be upset over. Neither Eric nor Gulliver had any trick up their sleeves either. That did nothing to dampen their enjoyment. In fact, who in Achewillow could have toiled over their cauldrons and waved their wands if not the two resident witches? No one expected Annabelle to perform any magic of her own. Except for Annabelle, of course. To laugh would have been unkind. Trust me, I reassured her. Getting into magical pissing contests with Ophelia is nothing to envy. Besides, it's not like you can't do a little magic of your own.
Miriam, I know one trick, and all it does is upset people. Impossibly dry towels and burgers of infinite water breathing are a little out of my reach right now. They'll probably always be.
Of the many qualities Annabelle possessed, her ability to spark her enthusiasm into roaring flame is amongst the most admirable. It takes a lot to mire her into a bog of gloom. Pouting, frowning, and clenching the strap of her bag like she could squeeze comfort out of it was all I needed to know that this was one of those rare occasions. Sure you will, I tried to cheer her up. But you can't compare yourself to Ophelia and me. I got a big old book of recipes to work with, and Ophelia's been trained by her elders. You're pulling your own discipline out of thin air. You can't expect that to come easily. We got to the crossroads between Saint Andrew and Rue Principale. This should have been my time to split from the group and make my way home. Ophelia and Gulliver were already going their own way, and my weary muscles demanded rest. Let me come over, I offered before thinking. Show me what you've got. I can't promise any pointers, but I can at least be a sounding board. Oh, the things I do for friends.
It's fine.
She brushes me and my offer away.
You don't need to wallow in my funk. Come on, it'll be fun. Two creepy witches getting drunk on spells. Tell me that's not something you've been dreaming about.
And there it was, the spark. Weak for now, it flickered in her eyes like a touch of golden light. Her cheeks pushed up and her lips curled into a half smile of mischief and temptation.
Well,
she said, weak confidence pushing the words out of her mouth.
There are a few things I've been meaning to try.
Arriving at the apartment Annabelle shares with my brother, my friend seemed to have regained most of her joie de vivre. That same energy that made her dive into a cold lake earlier in the day animated her limbs as she climbed the stairs and unlocked the door. So, Eric said, tossing his bag to the floor and stretching his arms. What are we trying? I exchanged a look with Annabelle, attempting that quiet telepathy friends sometimes share. Eric's my brother, but this is her home.
We,
she said,
are trying a new drink. Meanwhile, you can try that shooter game I keep faking interest in over breakfast.
Are you serious? But I love drinks. Grabbing his bag and shoving it into his arms, I pushed Eric towards his room. We'll bring you drinks later. Right now, we're having a girls' night. Wear some headphones, it's gonna get noisy. With a little more verbal and physical pressure, we managed to get Eric into his room and close the door on him. I have to admit to a certain malicious joy bullying him in his own home, but I needed Annabelle to myself if I was going to get her spirits up. I can have a girls' night, were the last words we heard Eric say from behind his door. Satisfied, wiping my hands together, I walked back to the small kitchen. My brother and Annabelle's apartment was the rope in a constant tug-of-war of cleanliness. Each had their obsessions, and the ever-changing state of things was an indicator of who was winning at the time. Empty counters, clean dishes, and meticulously placed cushions on the sofa were a sign that Eric had the upper hand this week. Annabelle preferred a wilder aesthetic for her decor. Meanwhile, Eric leaned towards clean lines and minimalist arrangements. It was a wonder they got along so well.
You see,
Annabelle started, pulling out bottle after bottle, neatly arranging them next to the sink.
the problem I'm noticing with trying to do magic with liquor and drinks is how chaotic things get. Knitting is all about order and patterns, while baking relies on precise chemistry. Making a magic cocktail is as much about vibes as it is about the drink itself.
Sitting on a stool opposite her, I was reminded of the Achewillow and how I would often offer counsel and coffee from behind the counter. It was interesting to see Annabelle take my place in this setting. She reminded me of myself in those first few days in the cafe.
All right,
I said, allowing her to take the lead. What have you got?
well, when I was in Montreal, I saw this guy make something called a dragon shot. Now, usually it's just a very boozy green or red mix, mostly vodka, rum, and schnapps. But this dude, wiry fellow, short with dark skin and raven black hair, wearing a full suit like an undertaker, he'd float a thin layer of cognac on top and light it. It smelled sweet like boiling sugar, and it'd warm up the entire bar. Best of all, in a dimly lit room, the flames would look like a dragon taking flight. I swear, with one of those in your stomach, you could walk home in the dead of winter without so much as a shiver.
I blinked a few times, looking around at the wooden cabinets and the wooden cutting boards. I took notice of the roll of very flammable paper towels next to the microwave and the vase of dried flowers in the corner near the refrigerator. That sounds a little intimidating, I said, already imagining a blaze consuming the little kitchen. Got anything a little less all-consuming? Energy undampened, Annabelle began listing a variety of cocktails and shots, all of which she'd seen at some point during her pilgrimage. From mixed liquor that could cure a cold to fruity drinks that promised to help you dance to any rhythm, there was something for everyone. There was also the standard collection of love potions and truth serums. She even mentioned a cocktail that could help you stay awake for hours. That last one sounded like coffee that got you drunk, and I can make that without a hint of magic. In the end, most of those either lacked the flair Annabelle was looking for or had effects that are difficult to measure, especially when consuming alcohol. It made me wonder if this particular brand of mystical mixology was just getting drunk and lying to yourself. Finally, we settled on a simple yet interesting shot, a classic I remember my father mentioning, but had never seen anyone my age order. A monkey's brain. In most circumstances, it's a gimmick drink, more interesting for its form than its flavor. It's a simple shot to make, too. Irish cream is carefully poured into a mix of vodka and lemon juice. The citrus curdles the cream, allowing it to form into a vaguely brain-shaped lump. A few drops of grenadine bring the illusion to life by simulating blood. A little trick on Annabelle's part, and the shot would have its touch of magic. Always remember, I explained, it's all about the intent. I also made a note to teach her to make her own grenadine syrup and how to put together a little altar in her kitchen. In time, she'd learn to shop for better ingredients and strengthen her connection to what went into every one of her drinks. For now, the cheap store-bought liquor would have to do. Right, she said, her tongue sticking out from between her teeth as she concentrated. I watched her work, fiddling with a bottle of peppermint schnapps while Annabelle measured and poured her vodka. Twisting the bottle around in my hands, I made a big show of going over the label. Twisting off the cap, I gave the contents a curious whiff, feigning detached interest. And if you have any, use fresh squeezed lemon juice. Right, Annabelle repeated, looking up. She turned around and dug through her refrigerator. I heard the produce drawer open and close and the rustling of a plastic bag. And while her attention was elsewhere, I poured a single drop of peppermint schnapps into her shot glass. So, what does this one do? Not more fire, I hope. Annabelle turned around, proudly brandishing a small yellow lemon and a paring knife.
Nope. There's an underground, unlicensed, unsavory dive on Saint Laurent where this woman who calls herself the vodka czar mixes weird drinks. None of them are magical except for this one. Legend has it that if done properly, when you take the shot, if you have a question, the brain will answer it.
Truth-saying spells are always ambitious, and this one felt no different. The simplicity of ingredients and ease of assembly meant that most of the mysticism relied on the mixologist. Considering Annabelle's lack of experience, I was worried that it wouldn't work. Fortunately, I had infused a little bit of my own magic. The schnapps wasn't added as a matter of taste. Peppermint is an ingredient associated with boosting confidence and self-esteem, two virtues I found my friend lacking. If nothing else, she would benefit from her spell in an unexpected way. Meticulous as a clockmaker, Annabelle poured the Irish cream into the shot glass, careful that the drizzle would sculpt itself into as close a replica of a brain as possible. Then, whispering to herself in the process, she counted exactly 3 drops of grenadine. Together, we leaned in from both sides of the counter to get a closer look. To her credit, Annabelle had concocted a perfectly gross brain the size of a walnut and bathing in liquor.
"Want to do the honors?"
she offered.
I can't think of anything to ask. Really? Nothing?
She sounded surprised.
I can think of a dozen things I need answers to.
My lips stretched into a wide and mischievous smile as I pulled away from the glass. With a gentle nudge, I pushed the shot closer to its creator, making sure none of the content was disturbed or spilled over.
Well, in that case, bottoms up.
The mood was buoyant. 2 friends about to do some witchy things and share some drinks. If all went well, Annabelle would get a little mystical boost of confidence and maybe even an answer to whatever question lingered in her mind. Of course, this wouldn't be much of a story if everything went to plan. Annabelle picked up the shot glass, raised it over her head, and smiled a nervous smile.
Santé.
Santé, I echoed, then caught myself.
Wait, is it supposed to do that?
Looking up, Annabelle squinted at her drink, then frowned. She brought the shot glass to eye level where we both studied the content anew. The brain was moving. A subtle pulsation animated the Irish cream while the grenadine had begun to circulate between the ridges of the false organ. What was originally a poor imitation of gray matter had become a realistic and almost living replica.
No,
Annabelle confirmed.
That ain't right. Ain't right at all.
No sooner did she voice her diagnosis than the shot exploded to life. We both cried out, and my friend dropped the glass to the counter. The contents, however, didn't spill or splash. Instead, they landed semi-solid next to the bottle of peppermint schnapps. The vodka mix sloshed and flowed, taking on a vague humanoid form around a head containing the brain. Like a cornered rat, the newborn homunculus scampered, dodging between the multitude of bottles on Annabelle's counter. A shaker was sent crashing to the floor while a bottle of wine teetered after being bumped.
What the hell?
We both stood paralyzed in the moment. My experiences with magical creatures rampaging around kitchens were wall-to-wall negative at that time. Whatever alcohol golem we had concocted, it wasn't one I had any intention of allowing to roam. "Where is it?" I asked, rummaging through my bag for some sort of weapon.
"Behind the gin."
Annabelle grabbed a bottle of vodka by the neck to use as a cudgel. In the back of my mind, I had the sneaking suspicion that my meddling might have had something to do with this unexpected turn of events. Pulling my trusty wooden spoon from amongst my things, I pushed the thought away. There would be time to distribute blame later. For now, my goal was to avoid a repeat of the macaron sprite incident. "Nudge the bottles," I instructed. "Try to force it out." In hindsight, I'm not quite sure what was so scary about the booze creature. It had no natural weapons and was smaller than a rat. If it was capable of fear, it must have been far more afraid of us than we were of it. But when the unreasonable happens, people do unreasonable things. Keeping as much distance as she could, Annabelle pushed the bottles of her collection closer to each other, poking at them until they were lined up against the wall. The ploy had the desired effect, but in a far more dramatic way than anticipated. The alcohol golem didn't scamper out harmlessly from its hiding place. Instead, it rushed from behind the bottles, sending another few rolling off the counter. We both screamed in shock, and I swiped my spoon at the homunculus, hoping to hit the brain and put an end to the unnatural creation. I missed. The spoon went low, cutting the liquid body in half. But as the utensil went through the vodka and lemon juice, tendrils of clear drink shot out from the creature. Unexpected and strong, the boozy tentacles managed to tear the spoon from my hand. Liquid was quick to seep into the grain of wood, strengthening the alcohol golem's grasp. For a second, I thought I had lost my spoon. May not sound like a big deal, but I had a strong emotional attachment to that particular kitchen utensil and no desire to see it broken or destroyed by a spell gone wrong. Fortunately, I didn't have to linger long on that dread. Annabelle was just as quick to violence as I was, bringing down her bottle of cheap vodka with all the might and finesse of an ogre, war cry and all. The bottle hit home, shattering on impact with the counter. Shards of broken glass and puddles of strong-smelling vodka went flying through the kitchen. To my relief, my precious spoon clattered against the oven door before falling to the floor, clear of most of the creature's remains. Our clothes, faces, and hair were all splattered with vodka, and I remember my eyes stinging from the liquor. For a second, the kitchen was quiet and everything remained still. Only the sound of dripping vodka broke the silence, a subtle reminder of our short adventure.
"Well,"
Annabelle said after a moment,
"that couldn't have gone any worse."
my friend has lived her entire life in Achewillow. She's known the town is home to supernatural forces since her early teens. Her own mother is mayor and guardian of our little village. Of all those close to me, she above all should know not to utter such words in the wake of a mystical mishap. No sooner were the words out of Annabelle's mouth than it started to happen. Like a gust of wind over the surface of a sleeping lake, a ripple traversed the spilled vodka. Pulling itself up from the puddle that covered the counter, dragging shards of sharp, clear glass along with it, the liquor began to flow back towards the point of impact. Despite her best and most violent effort, Annabelle had missed the brain. Like a discarded meatball, it lay soaked in the remains of its body. Pulsing, it sucked at the vodka in which it bathed, shaping its form anew, but with additional materials this time. With more liquor, it built a larger body, and with the glass shrapnel that littered the counter, it made itself an arsenal of teeth and claws. Like two paralyzed idiots, we stood and watched, witnessing the rebirth of something terrible, allowing the homunculus, now the size of a lean cat, to attack. Vengeful, it took a first swipe at Annabelle, drawing a thin line of blood from her arm. Where most people would have screamed and recoiled, however, my friend was true to her lineage, answering with a growl. The average person, myself included, would have probably run, but Annabelle was looking for weapons. Brave though she might have been, this was not the time.
"We gotta get out of here."
I grabbed her arm and pulled her away from the counter. She grabbed another bottle, the Irish cream this time. Instead of trying another ill-fated swing, though, she used the brown bottle to keep the liquor golem at a distance. We inched our way back into the living room, vodka dripping from our clothes and glass cracking underfoot. All the while, the homunculus paced the countertop like a feral animal. By happenstance, it had taken the form of a liquid octopus, prowling on an irregular assortment of tentacles and tendrils while its brain floated freely within the main body. Without a face, without a voice, it conveyed everything through body language. Fear, anger, and hostility expressed as quick, jerky movements and the occasional stabbing at nothing. Whether there was sentience in that improvised brain was difficult to determine. Magic, especially improvised magic gone wrong, is a carnival of chaos and danger. While the curiosity did nibble at the back of my mind, there was no time to stop and study the being. As we backed away to a safe distance, our animated shot lost interest in us. Instead, it padded around the counter, finding every last drop of vodka, absorbing them into its body, growing with every milliliter.
"I don't like this,"
Annabelle whispered.
"Don't worry,"
I said, a weak attempt at reassurance.
"there's only so much vodka for it to sponge up. How much bigger can it possibly get?"
My voice, meant to be firm and strong, shook with those last words, betraying my own worry and uncertainty. In fact, my mind was already painting terrible landscapes using only the darkest colors. What if this creature we had summoned wasn't limited to vodka or even liquor? What if it found its home in the sink, drinking from the faucet to grow ever larger, absorbing everything into itself as it went along? What if destroying the brain only fractured the golem into multitudes of other small creatures? Annabelle had her hand clasped over the cut on her arm. Rivulets of blood spilled over from between her fingers. A single crimson drop fell on her exposed knee, splashing into the shape of a dandelion. All I could think of was the grenadine dripping into the shot minutes before.
"Do you have any idea how much alcohol I keep in this apartment? You see that big jug with the bottles? That's 2 liters of the absolute worst bottom shelf vodka the law allows in stores. It's the swill I use to make mixes at the Donsolites or wherever I go people don't know their alcohol. I've got 3 more bottles just like it under the counter. If that thing figures out how to open them, it could get pretty damn big. The good news, it's plastic, so it can't just shatter on the kitchen tiles."
As if on cue, a bottle of spiced rum fell over, crashing behind the counter. We crouched behind the couch, eyes still locked onto the vodka golem. Through the jerking of its randomly put-together body, it seemed to sniff at the air before slithering down to the floor. My fingers dug into Annabelle's arms, fear coursing electric through my veins. We looked to the floor, and we looked at the rest of the furniture, searching for any sign of the creature. The ticking of glass claws on ceramic tiles told us it was still in the kitchen, but for how long? To our relief, it eventually climbed back onto the counter. Half leaping, half sloshing, it splashed itself up, always keeping its brain well protected. Then, to Annabelle's horror, it started to push more bottles to the floor.
"Aw, come on,"
she lamented. The sorrow was palpable in her voice. Every crash was another chunk of money ripped from her already lean wallet. Her teeth would grit, and gasps of horror would escape her throat every time the golem chose a bottle for destruction. And each time it would spasm, sniffing the air, turning away unsatisfied, then select another victim.
"Please, no, not that one."
I don't know booze, but I can recognize a bottle of Johnny Walker. I use the red label one when I need a decent scotch for recipes. This one looked to have a black label. And it, too, crashed to the floor. I thought Annabelle would cry. Finally, as my friend struggled to contain her sobs, the liquor golem found the large plastic bottle. Tapping on its surface with a glass claw, it seemed to recognize that this was not a bottle like the others. Where glass on glass would emit a satisfying high note, this one would suck in most of the sound. The surface offered a different kind of resistance, bending before moving.
"It looks almost curious,"
I suggested, awed when I should have been worried. The same glass claws scratched at the bottle's surface over and over, scoring it with an ever-deepening gash. Before long, it would reach the liquid and feast. "All right," I said, letting go of Annabelle's arm. "Enough. My meddling had caused this mess. It was time for me to put an end to it, or at least bring the situation to a more manageable version of itself." I grabbed the fishbowl of glass beads and seashells that served as a centerpiece to the living room coffee table. One of those uninspired decorations that looks like nothing and exists only to fill up space. Definitely not one of Eric's choices. Emptying the contents on the hardwood floor, I made my way back to the counter. Bowl held high above my head, I tried to sneak as best I could. But how does one creep up on something without eyes, ears, or even a nose? This is a creature that exists outside of senses, yet seems to exhibit all the behaviors of an animal with all of them. Thankfully, the golem's attention was consumed entirely by the enormous bottle of vodka. Every scratch was like a painter's stroke, bringing closer a life-changing masterpiece for its maker. With every scratch, I took a step. At last, I was so close I could see myself reflected upon the golem's surface. My features, twisted and deformed by the liquid shape, still managed to convey my fear with what I was about to attempt. Then, when I was finally within reach, I brought the bowl down, swift and decisive. The edges cut through the vodka golem's limb, leaving them to splash on the counter, lifeless and inanimate. I managed to halt my movement at the last inch, keeping me from breaking even more glass, but still capturing the golem in the fishbowl.
"Ha ha!"
I cried, triumphant.
"Gotcha, you little imp."
I was hit by a strong sense of déjà vu, like I had done the exact same thing before. And with that feeling came an overwhelming sense of dread, a vague memory that it hadn't gone well. Vodka sloshed around the upturned bowl, Irish cream brain floating this way and that. Shards of broken bottle tapped against the glass, making more noise than harm. The more it fought, the more I relaxed. Like the macaron sprite before, I had captured the magical anomaly, except this time before anyone was seriously hurt.
"I got it,"
I remember calling out with so much confidence. A rookie move. Turns out, those decorative globes aren't made of the sturdiest material. The glass is thin and delicate. They are built to look pretty and show off their contents, not to withstand continuous and determined attacks. Whatever crude intelligence animated the vodka, lemon juice, and Irish cream quickly picked up on that. The raw, uncooked sentience gathered all of the shards of glass it had been using for claws and teeth, balling them together into a single mass. Then, like a clam spitting water, it vomited the fragments into the inner surface of the bowl, spreading cracks like a spider web. I could see what kind of pie was being baked and pulled my hands away from the bowl before it shattered. Thin glass is sharp glass, and the liquor golem now had a fresh batch of large, keen shards to play with. Instead of turning this new arsenal towards me, the creature lashed at the plastic bottle, slicing a clean wound through its neck, allowing clear liquid to pour out. The homunculus seemed to forget about me in that instant, focusing on the bottle and the pungent vodka. I backed away while the creature latched itself on the bottle, sucking and slicing, bisecting it to absorb every last drop.
"I don't want to be a critic,"
Annabelle started to lament.
"I know. But I think you messed up. I know."
We watched, enthralled and awestruck, while the vodka golem drank its fill. Before long, it had become the size of a basset hound, except with more teeth and a worse attitude.
"I'm so stupid,"
Annabelle whispered, mortified. The golem had gone back to testing bottles for their content, like a cat pushing them off the counter and observing the results for something to use.
"I don't have what it takes for this. I'm not like you and Ophelia."
Don't say that, I countered. I didn't want to get into it at the time. Too much baggage to unpack and too many mixed feelings to untangle. Mostly, though, I didn't want to admit my part in the catastrophe.
"It's true. I reached too high and now there's another weird monster on the loose in Achewillow. And I know you're going to figure it out. You'll solve this. I just hope no one gets hurt before you do."
The last of the bottles, some cheap gin, fell to the ground with a crash. The air smelled of booze and flowers, stinging our eyes the longer we stayed in the room. Another crash. The golem had pried open one of the cupboards above the counter, spilling the contents of glasses, bowls, and plates to the floor. No heirlooms amongst them, and while they were average dinnerware bought from some big box store, the sheer quantity, added to the vast amount of alcohol spilled, all of it amounted to hundreds, if not thousands, of dollars wasted. There was more damage to come, yet the real concern was for our lives. More blood dripped from between Annabelle's fingers as she held her arm, proof of the vodka golem's capacity for harm. While we obviously wanted the destruction to stop, our pressing concern was safety, and the safety of everyone else in Achewillow should this thing get loose. Watching the creature tear through a second cupboard, this time tossing glasses, cups, and mugs down, it became clear the couch we hid behind would offer no real protection. The speed at which liquid limbs whipped through the cupboard, and the strength displayed with how the creature held itself aloft on thin stands of itself, it would be on top of us before we could hide, should the damn thing have a mind to do so. "What if we set it ablaze?" I suggest from between my teeth. "Like a crepe Suzette. We'd light it on fire and let it burn itself out."
In my apartment? I still don't have a steady job and would rather not lose my deposit, thank you very much. And that's if we don't turn ourselves into living bonfires in the process. Then there's your brother who's still in his room.
All right, I interrupted. It was a stupid idea. Unless... I grabbed the bottle of Irish cream out of Annabelle's hand, brandishing it like a trophy. What if we use this? I unscrewed the top of the bottle, allowing the fresh aroma of cocoa and vanilla to mix with the harsh smell of mixed liquor. It keeps trying to get vodka to grow bigger. Maybe it'll be just as interested in getting more brain matter. Eyes wide with fear and self-doubt, Annabelle looked back and forth between me and the creature. The vodka golem had been busy, playing around with a toaster oven pilfered from the last top cupboard of the kitchen. Soon, it would start digging through the other ones under the counter where Annabelle had boasted more vodka was stored. Once it got to those, we'd be dealing with a monster the size of a German shepherd. Then, I insisted, once we're outside, we can light it on fire and let it burn. Unsure and hesitant, Annabelle shook her head. She struggled to get her point out, but eventually pushed the words through her trembling lips.
I don't think you understand how long liquor takes to burn. A splash of Grand Marnier in a pan goes out pretty quick, but a shot of Sambuca, let alone an entire growler's worth of vodka, we'd just go from a magical booze monster with glass claws to a burning magical booze monster with glass claws. I mean, we can try it if you want. God knows I've only messed up so far.
I put my thumb on the bottle's opening. She had a point. Things were bad enough without literally setting them on fire, but I was running out of ideas fast and wanted this disaster behind us as soon as possible. The more devastating the damage, the more Annabelle would blame herself, which was the exact opposite of what I'd hoped to accomplish. "This isn't your fault," I said, my voice flat to hide the shame. "I messed with your spell."
What?
She turned an apprehensive eye on me, frowning as her features tightened. "I thought you needed a confidence boost," I explained, avoiding her gaze, pretending to be more interested in the monster's actions. "So I added something to the shot to bolster your self-esteem. I didn't think it could backfire so bad. If anyone's the incompetent witch here, it's me." I didn't have the vocabulary to read Annabelle's emotions through her features. Layers of exhaustion, pain, betrayal, and even relief piled atop one another to create a complex texture beyond my ability to interpret. Like too many ingredients dropped in a stew, they lost their individual identity to become something new and different.
You mean this isn't my mess?
I shook my head. Nope, this one is on me. As if freshly exercised, a weight was visibly lifted from my friend. Her shoulders lost a little of their slouch and her neck straightened by 1/2 degree. Her frown, which had been one of fear and recrimination, shifted to express instead a new grit on her part. I wouldn't say Annabelle was 100% back from her funk, but at least she wasn't shouldering the entire weight of the situation any longer. And that made her a lot more useful in the minutes to come. A clattering of pots and pans came from the kitchen. The creature was emptying a cupboard of cauldrons and other cooking vessels. The noise was deafening, and even the monster seemed startled by what it had wrought. "Hey!" Eric's voice echoed from the other side of the apartment. "Are you guys okay? That's a lot of—" He stopped dead in his tracks. Flannel pajama pants, gaming headphones still around his neck, and eyes the size of ping-pong balls, stricken with shock. What a sight it must have been for him. His little sister and roommate cowering behind a couch, while a blob of vodka and Irish cream, like some nightmare amoeba, tore through his kitchen. Eric hadn't been on the front lines of Achewillow's little shadow wars against demons and ghosts. He knew of macaron sprites and hellgates through my and Annabelle's tales. Coming face to face with genuine horror brought to life was still jarring to him. "Stand back," Eric warned, stepping forward while putting up his fists. Flexing his arms and adopting a convincing combat stance, he started to inch forwards towards the kitchen, ready to exchange blows with the vodka golem. Oh, my brave brother. How he would have been torn to shreds if not for my and Annabelle's hissing and waving of hands urging him back to his room.
"Stay away from that thing, you idiot,"
I ordered.
"Eric, please," Annabelle insisted. "Just hide in your room. Miriam and I have this."
"You get in your room," I snarled, "and you do not step foot outside of there until we go get you. Understood?" While Eric hesitated, the monster turned around to face him. Well, as much as anything without a face or front can. Spreading itself wide and tall, the golem made itself look big and menacing. Glass claws and fangs glistened under the kitchen lights, emphasizing their sharp edges. Seeing what he was up against more clearly, Eric took a step back and lowered his fists. As he was about to disappear around the corner and down the corridor, he raised his hands and gave Annabelle and me one last look.
"Go!"
Annabelle pressed on him one last time. With that final order, Eric vanished. Only the click of a door's bolt confirmed he had gone back to his room to wait out the crisis. Apparently satisfied, the creature went back to its search. Either it was going to turn the entire apartment upside down, or it knew there was more vodka from which it could feed somewhere. Clumsy yet determined, it tore open cabinets and cupboards, emptying the contents until it finally stopped. Not because there wasn't more to explore, or from lack of energy. Fully half the bottom cupboards in the kitchen had yet to be investigated, and whatever unnatural force powered the golem, it showed no sign of weakening. No. It stopped because it had found. Hidden behind the counter, we could still hear it, sloshing around. The sounds of plastic being punched through and torn open told us all we needed to know about the homunculus's activities.
"New plan,"
Annabelle said, snatching the bottle of Irish cream from my hand. She pushed past me, determination having replaced self-recrimination. Annabelle's battleground had always been parties and gatherings. She was, and still is, a social warrior. Her weapons are boundless intrapersonal energies and the ability to talk to anyone about anything at any moment. The spoils of her victories are the joy she sees in people having the time of their lives. She was built to become a legendary bartender. On that evening, though, she showed a rare new side of herself. Still cunning but with an edge of anger, she stormed to the front of the counter. Before I could warn her against such foolhardy behavior, she kicked it.
"Hey!"
A monster the size of a dog had vanished behind the counter, terrifying for its speed, strength, and the arsenal it had grafted onto itself. What rose in response to Annabelle's provocation was something else. Still not as tall as a man, it rather had the volume of a wolf or lynx. This was a true predator, made menacing not only by its mystical nature and unpredictable attitude, but by sheer weight and size. Rounding the counter and walking on 4 improvised limbs, it let out a gurgling growl. Without lungs to push out air or vocal cords to shape sounds, all it could do was move the liquor in its body to create noise. The results were strange and unsettling.
"You poor dumb beast,"
Annabelle said, trying to keep the golem's attention.
"You've no idea what's going on, do you?"
Jerking the bottle of Irish cream towards the monster, she splashed the beast with some of the liquor. Thirsting, demanding, the creature absorbed the tan-colored liquid. Like an eel in water, the splash snaked its way through the monster's body, swimming until it found its way to the lump that served as its brain, attaching to the pre-existing organ. As soon as the unnatural assimilation was complete, the golem jerked, its form refined and its movements gaining precision and fluidity.
"That's right,"
Annabelle teased further.
"Feels good to think a little clearer, doesn't it?"
She shook the brown bottle, enticing the monster with the bait of intellect.
"Miriam,
She handed me the bottle.
think you can keep luring it out, like to the garage, all the way down the stairs? Don't give it too much. Let's not make the damn thing any smarter than it needs to be."
Without hesitation, I took the bottle and stepped between her and the beast. In doing so, I had become the new bait, and this fresh position put into perspective what it was we were dealing with. "What's the plan?" I asked, hoping a reassuring answer would bolster my courage.
"The plan is to trust me."
With that uninspiring answer, I heard the door open behind me and my friend's steps hurrying down the apartment's stairwell. The vodka golem gurgled a fresh threat. Closer now, I could smell the inebriating fumes emanating from its body. Without replenishment, such a volatile form would eventually dry itself out to nothing, leaving behind a glob of curdled Irish cream. By the time that would happen, though, the monster could cut a bloody swath through Achewillow, or, failing that level of ambition, through Annabelle, Eric, and me. Okay, I stepped backwards through the threshold.
"Want to get smart, little buddy? I've got just the thing you need."
I splashed a little more at the monster, watching as the phenomena repeated, including the refinement of the beast's body language. No doubt about it, I had its attention. Walking backwards, struggling not to trip down the stairs, I did my best to lure the creature after me. Whenever its attention would wane, either because I'd strayed too far or the new environment offered fresh sensations to experience, I would splash some more Irish cream into its body. By the time I got to the garage level, the brain had gotten to the size of a baseball, and the liquor golem had adapted to walk on two improvised limbs that could be described as feet. Either through mimicry or necessity, the monster now behaved as a clumsy biped, having gone so far as to move its brain into a bulbous appendage that could be described as a head. The smell of oil and moisture mixed with that of vodka and Irish cream to create a blend reminiscent of the back of clubs in Montreal. It was the stench of where my friends would go to smoke between songs. I hated those places, and this garage, with the dim lights and stained concrete floors, felt like an almost perfect replica. Aging and weak fluorescent lights fought to outline the vodka golem's form as it stood, one foot in a puddle of foul water, the other on chipped concrete next to a rusted metal drain. I wondered for a second, had I given this monster, through repeated dosage of Irish cream, enough intelligence that it understood its situation? Was there a point where it became unethical to destroy the beast? The thoughts barely touched upon my consciousness before a stream of pressurized water cut through the vodka golem, slicing it neatly in half. Its legs, detached from the main body, fell to the floor like a bucket thrown from a window. The liquor splashed onto my legs, soaking through my sock as it ran down my calf. Most of it, however, fell to the floor and flowed down the rusted drain. From the shadows, holding the nozzle of a gardening hose like a pistol, Annabelle stepped forth, ready to dish out more liquid violence. She didn't wait to gloat or hesitate to admire her handiwork. Satisfied with the immediate results, she shot again, cutting another chunk of the golem from the hole. Her third attempt didn't have the same impact. The vodka golem anticipated her move, and although it wasn't fast enough to dodge the stream of water, it was smart enough to absorb it. That turned out to be a fool's gambit. We knew from its disdain that the vodka golem had no taste for water. Even other liquors were left in puddles on the kitchen floor. Only vodka would grow its body, and Irish cream its mind. Faucet water, sprayed from a dirty garden hose, while bloating its form, did not nourish. The creature grew, swirling clouds catching the dim light where alcohol and water struggled to mix. The body, while larger with every moment, was losing cohesion. It took clumsy steps, fighting to keep its failing balance. The water would sweat out of the monster in buckets, dripping down to the floor almost as fast as it was being absorbed. With the water, though, came copious amounts of vodka. The smell alone testified to it. The golem was diluting, becoming less potent with every gallon of water it drank. When it got to the size of a large man but round as a beach ball, a final tremor ran over its surface. Then, unable to maintain its form any longer, the creature broke. Like a giant water balloon having reached maximum capacity, the surface tension that kept it together failed, and the entire beast fell to the ground. A tsunami of water and vodka, though mostly water at this point, splashed every surface of the garage, including Annabelle and me. Soaked, we both stepped forward, eyes scanning the wet concrete, looking for that one final problem that needed solving.
"There,"
Annabelle said before unleashing one last blast of water from her hose. She reminded me of a janitor trying to wash out some offending piece of detritus from the ground. She sprayed the lump of Irish cream and grenadine, breaking it apart with water before pushing the fragments down the drain. She kept spraying like that for another minute, taking no chance that the golem would somehow reassemble itself while making its way through the sewers of Achewillow.
"I'll get you new dishes," I said as we cleaned up the kitchen, "and new liquor."
I mopped while Annabelle would wipe the floor with towels to finish the job. She wore gloves so as not to get any more cuts from the broken glass.
But good liquor this time. Quality ingredients matter. "You don't have to do that,"
Annabelle said, emptying a dustpan of wet glass into the garbage.
"I mean, you absolutely need to get me new dishes and booze, but just replace what got wasted."
I leaned on my mop, resting my chin on the handle. Night had fallen, and the apartment was dimly lit in that cozy way that's perfect to watch movies in. Getting top-shelf booze to replace all her losses was going to be a hit on my finances. Booze can get pricey quick, and we'd have to work together to find the alcohols that have the most natural ingredients and processes. But in the end, if it meant not having a repeat of that day's incident, it was going to be worth it. "It's the least I can do," I explained. Mother, this is hard. I don't know what I'm doing. This liquor magic thing, it sounds like cooking with booze, but it's not. I thought in all my hubris that I could figure it out, that I had figured it out. Truth is, though, I barely know what I'm doing with kitchen magic. I get the basics, but most of the time I'm recycling recipes left by the other Dufour witches that came before me. I haven't even added a single new page to the family cookbook. I'm in no position to be a teacher. Annabelle wrung out a towel before noticing the wound on her arm had reopened. She dabbed the cut with the towel, wincing as the mixed liquor stung her flesh.
"That would have been awesome,"
she said between gritted teeth.
"You know how much fun it would have been to have you as a mentor? The two of us mixing magic cocktails and eating magic muffins or whatever. I'd have loved that."
I mopped a little more, swishing a nasty puddle of random alcohol around, hoping to see the end of it soon.
"I'll help you find a proper teacher,"
I said, focusing on the tiles underfoot. "And I'll share as much knowledge, theoretical knowledge, as I can with you. That starts with getting you good ingredients, and maybe we can build you an altar. Turn this kitchen into your own little sanctum of liquor magic." Annabelle kneeled down and soaked up some more of the booze and glass into her rag. She looked up, her smile of impish optimism finally returned.
"I'd like that,"
she said, pulling herself up to carelessly toss out the glass shards again.
"Hopefully, Eric doesn't mind me commandeering the kitchen for all my witchy affairs."
We smiled at each other for a few seconds, her glad to have found a path for her studies, and me happy that my friend and I had found safe footing for our relationship, despite my pride almost getting us killed. Then it hit us. It had been almost an hour. Annabelle had defeated the liquor golem, and we'd started cleaning up. But through the whole thing, there was one little detail we'd both neglected.
Eric!
Annabelle rushed to his room to reassure him the crisis was over. Looking at her, soaked in watered-down liquor, fresh cut in need of bandaging, yet still bubbling over with enthusiasm and optimism, I found myself faced with a third flavor of jealousy. One bereft of bitterness or anger. Sure, there was envy, but not because I wanted to take away what she had or experience it myself. Listening to her tell our tale of horror to my brother with so much excitement, I decided that what I wanted above all was to share Annabelle's spirit of adventure, to be part of how she saw the world. I would get there one day. There would come a time when I would satisfy this joyous envy, and that would get me one step closer to understanding Doris and the other Dufour witches. But not before paying a toll of blood and suffering.
Achewillow is written by J.F. Dubow and narrated and produced by me, Amy Frost. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast platform. Want to support the show? Buy us a coffee. Go to ko-fi.com/Achewillow to donate. Achewillow has a Patreon. Visit patreon.com/Achewillow for details. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram under the username Achewillow.